All right. It is Friday. It's time for API storytelling time. Let me bring my friend Aiden in.
Hey Ken,
What are you doing today?
pretty good. I'm excited. It's now like officially spring and it's finally getting nice outside.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a cloudy day here today, but it's been really nice. So I'm feeling the vibe too. Let's loop Mike in.
Hey.
Welcome, sir.
Hey, it's good to be here. How you guys doing?
Feeling good. I got my second COVID shot, so I'm supercharged, 5G, all that good stuff.
Very, very good. I don't know if we talked about this last week. I got my shot a few weeks ago, so I'm like 100% and past all that. And the first time the whole family got, everybody made 100% was Cinco de Mayo. So we all went out. We had drinks and dinner and had a good time outside. 6 days later, I'm back outside. I went biking a little bit, out to dinner again. So all this talk, like I said, I don't miss this and like I'm fine and all this. No, man. In less than a week, I've already been out to dinner twice. So I think I'm feeling good.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So what do we got cooking today? I hear we got a pretty cool guest coming.
Yeah, we got a very special guest who we're lucky to have. I think one of all of our favorite people to talk to when the world is open and to, I'm sure, get dinner and drinks with when it's allowed. Greg Koberger, who's the founder of Readme, is here to talk to us today. He's been in the space for a really long time, and I can't wait to have him on the show.
Yes, I've had drinks with Greg in many places, in many events. So let's get him in here and let's kick this off.
Hello. How you guys doing?
Hey, good to see you.
You as well. I am about to join your club in about 2 hours, get my final shot.
Cool, man.
So pretty soon I'll be with at least the two of you, Ken and Mike. But so yeah, that's right. That's happening right after this. So we'll see how that goes. But thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, it's good that you're doing the show before the shot.
I know,
because apparently it knocks people out.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully not that bad. I have to drive, so hopefully I can get back home before things go south.
Oh yeah, you'll be fine.
It's that night after and the next day that really kicks your butt. If it does, like my wife was fine. So
I should have done it on like a Tuesday, so I had an excuse to take a few days off from work. Now I just lose a weekend.
Right.
So
that's right.
Oh man. So you do Readme, which is, I think, one of the API services out there that I think has kind of leveled the conversation and brought in a lot more, I would say, non-developers, business folks, leadership, people who want to try to reach a wider audience. I mean, reach the developers, but I think your guys' approach to making APIs tangible and approachable is something that appeals beyond just developers and makes it something that is almost, it's just more palatable and approachable by business folks. And it looks like something that's not that GitHub. I mean, GitHub looks nice too. I don't always understand this one, but people have, they're like, ooh, I don't go to GitHub. I'm not a programmer. Mm-hmm. But Readme portals are very approachable and something that, and managing it. So tell me about like how and why and what's behind the name. Like, where'd you come up with the name?
Yeah, I'll start with the name because so we're readme.com now. So I'll get to how we ended up with the .com. But the way we got the .io was I was trying to come up with a name, and I was in love with this company called statuspage.io. It's a dev tool, sort of. It's like a very similar type vibe, and it does exactly what you imagine it does. So I really wanted the name to be like developerhub.io, and I copied them completely. I was doing freelancing at the time, actually, and I was working for this company called WotC, which is this nonprofit that I love, and I was doing freelancing half-time, then half-time I was starting what ultimately became Readme. And I don't know, one day I was like at the office and I would work from there, and I emailed the status. I emailed like hello@statuspage.io, and I was like, hey, this is kind of weird, but like I've loved your blogs, I've loved everything about it. I just really appreciate like how open you've been. I just want to say thank you for putting all that content out there. And like I just sent like a nice email, and I didn't know anyone's name. I didn't know who I was sending it to. I just like hello@statuspage.io, and the woman sitting next to me goes, "I just saw your email." And I was like, "What?" And it turns out the person I was working for, her boyfriend was the person who ran statuspage.io. And I genuinely had no clue whatsoever. And so I became friends with them and everything. And I wanted developer.hub.io or something like that really kind of like described exactly what we did. Because I thought that's what I like companies like that. It's either like I don't know, there's no ambiguity. It's like, okay, I know exactly what it does. But I couldn't get it. I tried like LiveDocs, DocHub. I was really going for that like GitHub acquisition at one point with DocHub. And I was on Hacker News one time and someone was giving away readme.io to a good home. And I was like, I can be a good home. So I reached out and they were giving away for free, but I wanted to make sure I got it because I was like, became obsessed with this. I was like, I'll pay you $3,000 because a lot of people wanted it, but no one else was going to pay. So I paid $3,000 for it. But then I got the .com about a year ago, and that cost many multiples of $3,000. But yeah, so that's where I came up with it. It's kind of a blessing and a curse. I like the name. One, I always get text messages from friends, like high school friends, like not in tech, who will like be like, "Oh my God, I just saw your startup on like Mr. Robot." And I'll be like, "No, this is like a readme.txt file. That's a thing." Because like in the terminal, they're always like vimming into like a readme file, and like everyone thinks that I have like, not people at tech obviously, but like, you know, my friends always think that I have like insane product placement. So so that's the blessing and the curse. And the bigger blessing and the curse is readme evokes. And I love the name, so we're not going to change anytime soon. But like, it does definitely evoke like this concept of like paragraphs of text. And I think you know, we do API documentation, so that's great. But I believe that you know, documentation should be showing rather than telling more. And so that's kind of where the name comes in. It's like we're not just doing README files where it's just like, you know, paragraphs of text. We do a lot of, you know, of text, but you know, showing rather than telling, like making things interactive, you know, generating code snippets that you can tweak into code builder, things like that. Showing logs in line so people can do actual debugging right in the docs. So in some ways you could argue that it's like a little limiting, but yeah, that's how I ended up with the name. It was kind of a weird coincidence, but I'm pretty happy with it.
That's very cool. I love that. I love the story, especially the story about the person next to you. I love that story. But I also love the whole idea about, you know, like it says it right on the tin kind of concept. You know, It's like, no, this is what we do. And I always thought of it when I've looked at interacted with README and I looked at it, the way I took this, so this is just, you know, feedback, is like, I want you to read me. Like, you know, this is documentation that's inviting. This is an experience that's like drawing me in. I commonly talk about people using documentation in anger. You know, it's like, damn it, all right, fine, I'll read the docs. You know, and so to me, this has always been a kind of a feeling like, no, you want to read me. You want to come here. So that's really the message I get from it. So I think that sort of, to me, just from sort of a, you know, a branding product perspective, that tells me there are enough stories about what that meme is, what that README meme is, just like readme.txt and all these others, that you're sitting on a gold mine. That's going to be a lot of fun. You have a lot of angles, a lot of perspective from it. So I find the material very engaging, the way your product is built, is, as well as the way you encourage people to build their own products. I really love that.
I definitely like playing with that for like swag type stuff. We don't do it anymore, obviously, but we used to do like when we did in-person interviews for candidates, we'd like give them a book and a water bottle and stuff like that. But the water bottles were custom branded, and they would say like "drink me" and like in the README logo, but it would say like "drink me." And like we really lean into like stuff like that. Like the book would say like "write me," and we would really lean into the like exactly that. I don't think it's great branding publicly. I wouldn't put it on the website necessarily, but you know, for like internal swag and fun stuff like that, I thought it was a lot of fun to like play with. So
I love it. Yeah.
Cool.
One of the things that I've noticed from your website, I was looking again just the other day, and then having some conversations with you, is that you know, README is becoming so much more than just documentation, which I think is how a lot of people still have that perception in their mind. And it's pretty cool that you've thought about sort of not just what you're showing people, but the people on the other side of it, and you're helping people like design the right experience for their end users. So I'd love to hear you talk about that. I think it's really cool how the product's evolved.
Yeah, I always, so I did I'm going into stories because this is a storytelling. So let me know if I go a little too tangent-y. But so we did Y Combinator. For people who don't know, it's just a incubator VC firm. And the way it works is you do 10-minute interviews. And I applied with a company which ultimately became Readme, but it was called Doc Hub at the time. And again, trying to go for that GitHub acquisition at the time, I guess. And like we interviewed with them, and like by the end, you get 10 minutes to describe everything. And like this was really early on, no code is written. This is more of an idea. And like I was like, by the end, the last thing they said to me was like, "Oh, so you guys just like really like writing documentation?" I was like, "No, it's the exact opposite. Like I hate writing documentation. I'm bad at it. I never really want to do it again." I think like just plain documentation is not good enough. And I feel, and the way I think about it has evolved a lot since then, but it's basically the same concept, which is I feel like the best documentation shows rather than tells. You know, and if you and I are using the same API and it's your first time using it, and I've been using it for months and months, like you probably want some marketing pages. You probably want something that's like, you know, kindly going to walk you through getting your API key and like making your first call and like being really excited when you do that. But I don't want that. If I'm on the docs after like, you know, a year and things are down and broken, the last thing I want is a cutesy little like, you know, welcome to the so-and-so API documentation. Let's get started. Like I want the documentation to know what's going on. And like documentation traditionally doesn't know what's going on, but it could because it's all APIs. It's all out there. Like the data is someplace. It's just, you know, locked up someplace. So that's always been my belief is that you definitely need written paragraphs of text. You definitely need guides. You definitely need support forms, whether they be public or private. You definitely need reference guides. But also it's really great if it knows who you are and shows you different things based on who you are. And it's really hard to do though, because people, they have a very strong mental model of what documentation is. And that's fine. And I don't want to like shy away from saying we do documentation because I think it's very, I don't want to try to be selling, like from a business perspective, I don't want to be selling like some sort of like, you know, high level thing that doesn't make sense. Like, you know, I know, you know, Postman and Optic, like they're very like concrete things. There's other add-ons and stuff like that that are less concrete, but they're all like very concrete. They solve problems. And I think documentation is a problem people have. And like, I don't know, I wouldn't want to ever have you go to like our site and say like, you know, Readme does developer experiences. Like, sure, I want to believe that, but like, what does that mean? So like kind of like, you know, evoking documentation, people are like, oh, I know what that means. So again, blessing and a curse, where the curse is sometimes it's hard to change people's perceptions of what documentation could be. Yeah, but basically to sum it all up, like I could spend the rest of the hour just rambling on about all the cool stuff you can do by like bringing logs right into the docs. Right. But you know, to sum it up, it's just like, you know, being able to show different people different things, I think is really exciting. And letting them debug and letting them eventually get support if they get really stuck. And not just like, you know, having a static generated docs that's you just, you know, some engineer threw it over the wall and is like, figure out our API. Because Ken, one thing you said when we started out was there's a ton of people who use APIs who are involved in APIs now who aren't developers. You know, 10 years ago, like when most people here got into the space, like I don't think that was necessarily true. I think if someone said I work with APIs, you're like, oh, okay, you probably have a CS degree or you're probably pretty technical, or maybe you don't have a formal training, but like you're probably pretty technical. But now that's not necessarily true. There's so many people involved with APIs, and the APIs are so incredibly valuable. Like some of the customers that we have, I'm so in a good way confused by, but like excited by. Like you wouldn't think they have APIs. Like Fortune 500 consumer good companies. But of course they do, because it's just transferring data back and forth and stuff like that. And yeah, I love developers and I like work with developers. And when I started Readme, I was 100% sure it would be like by developers for developers, much like, you know, GitHub's vibe is. But it's all over the map. We have a ton of developers, but we also have a ton of people who, you know, from all walks of life that are involved in the API ecosystem now.
Well, I really attribute, I think you guys helped expand. I think that and bring in those people and setting the stage. I think there was many things that set that table, but you know, that the notion of what is docs, and I agree with you, like there's people have very rigid views of what is or isn't docs. And that's been really tough to break. And whether it's the API managements companies kind of prescribe, like, here's what docs are, you know, and you hang them in a portal and they, you know, and to Swagger UI, you know, like Swagger UI when it came out was just revolutionary. It was pretty, like, it blew a lot of people away. But 6 years later, I'm like, come on, like, let's move on. Like, let's use these capabilities. But man, I'm so sick of seeing Swagger UI. And when you guys came along, I was just like, oh yeah. It was like, it was really a breath of fresh air, as far as, okay, not only can it look, it can look different, it can look pleasant. It doesn't have to be this jarring experience, more technical or dev experience. But you guys came at, I think, docs are the number one problem that people face when doing APIs. And you came at it, I think, from a different view than the API management or the developers. And it landed in a way that then I think opened the door wider, is how I see you guys coming onto the space. So big fan.
Yeah, I think there's, I assume all of us kind of feel the same way about our products, but like, there's so many things and we're so far off from where I want to be. And like, even when we get there, then by that time we get there, I'll have like, 10 more things I want to do, or 20 or 50. But I always felt like, to me, it was so, and everyone can have different opinions, and that's kind of, why, there's not one API tool. Like, you need to use Postman, and you need to use, even backend like management stuff. But I always felt like it was weird to me that like documentation, there wasn't anyone that really cared about documentation, and there still really isn't. We have some competitors now, but it's I think the how do I put it? I think documentation is so undervalued in what goes into making a great API, and that's what makes me so excited, because I think documentation is kind of the UI UX for APIs. And but you mentioned like Swagger UI, and I don't want to like specifically talk about any one product, but traditionally I think documentation, like reference guides, are very I think people think, oh, people will be able to figure it out, and that's somewhat true. Most developers can figure it out if they're incentivized enough to, and by incentivized I mean they either really, really want to, or their boss said they had to, or most APIs. So I'm gonna take a quick segue into like, there's this concept, like I know a lot of companies have tried to do like these like API hubs, like GitHub for APIs or something like that, where it's like a gigantic repository of like all the APIs you could ever want. But I don't know if you guys agree with this, and definitely disagree if you disagree, but I don't think that's how people find APIs for the most part. There's a few situations where you're like, I need an API that looks up IP addresses, or I need an API that does X or Y or Z, or I need a text message API and Twilio is too expensive, or I want different coverage or something like that. But for the most part, I don't think people think that way. I think most APIs are, you've already picked the API before you pick the API. Like, you're already using Notion before you use the Notion API. You're not like comparing the Dropbox API with the Box API. Like, it doesn't really work that way for the most part. And that's not completely true always, but where I'm going with this is, a lot of times API developers have been really lucky that the person about to use their API has to use their API. There's no getting around it. There's some examples where you can get around it, where you can do something like Rapid API. And if you haven't talked to Ito, you definitely should see if he'll come on, because I really like talking to him. But like Rapid API wraps APIs and normalizes them and stuff like that. And in that case, then like you do get to choose, but you're not choosing, do I use the Box API or not? You're choosing like, do I use the Box raw API? Do I use their SDK, or do I use the Rapid version, which kind of is a proxy type thing? Or there's like standard lib is another example of like a normalizing agent on top of it. So like you can choose how you interact with an API, but you're not really choosing the API for the most part, I feel. And I think that means that API developers can go a long way with really crappy documentation, because you're locked in, you're stuck using them. But it doesn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way. And on top of that, like, just because 10 people use your API doesn't mean you've hit this like local maximum where it's like only 10 people can use it. Like, I think too many people put up shitty docs. Sorry, I'm not sure if I can swear here, but put up really bad docs, and then they're like, well, I guess no one wants our API, or it's not good, or like it's all the information is right there, and like, but you don't see, because one thing that's really bizarre to me too, and this is changed recently, and now there's product people involved in APIs for the most part, like most decent sized APIs, but there's no tracking, there's no understanding. Like a lot of the stuff that we do for regular websites, like if we're going to spin up a website, we would put in like a bunch of analytics. We put in a bunch of, an intercom chatbots so people can talk to us. We put in, we put in effort into like maybe having a copywriter, like, work on onboarding stuff and all that. With API documentation, people don't, some companies do it, but it's not, people don't really do it. And like, it's weird to me how many users people probably hemorrhage. either lose or don't get to love them because they're so frustrated by the API, just because they don't put much effort into the API docs. So I don't know. I just feel like API documentation is it doesn't really matter if your API is good or not if your documentation's really, really good. To a certain extent.
It really, for me, documentation is a window to everything else behind the API. All, the design of the API, it's the organizational structure. Like it's a window, and sure, it's kind of like the glass you put on your bathrooms that's fog, so you can't see naked people in there. So you don't get this full view you don't see the naked people in the enterprise, but you do see the dysfunction. I think you do see it does bubble out into shitty documentation, and we can cuss on this show. I guess we've never talked about that before, but we can have a separate conversation another time about it. But and then I mean you touch on the producer side, so it's a window into all of this dysfunction or goodness or intent and belief, and I would say empathy, and then you talked about like some of the feedback loop mechanisms for the consumer side is like, if we're putting up a website, this is intended for humans. We know humans are going to come here. We're going to have a conversation with them. We're going to answer their questions. We're going to do these different things. And, those of us in the space in the DevRel space have had to fight for years for like, hey, let's not it's not just applications and code that's going to become using our APIs. Like we've got to cater to human beings. We've got to get human beings. So I think good docs reflects that empathy and that reciprocity that has to occur between the publisher and the consumer.
Yeah, and I keep saying documentation, but I think there's so many different things that in my mind fall under documentation. Maybe they shouldn't be called documentation. I don't really care what we call it, but I think you definitely could call it documentation, because once you get away from documentation, you're getting into like weird words like developer portal or developer hub, and I'm cool with all those things. But I don't know. I think documentation is so ingrained in like how we do stuff that I'm happy with the word. But yeah, it's such an easy way to kind of create a relationship with the customer, like you said, Ken, and like hide away a lot of the dysfunction. I always talk about like documentation can be very good at normalizing bad APIs. Not that you should have a bad API, but no API is dead simple, easy to use, because if you're using like an NPM package or a Ruby gem, like if you get really stuck, you like dig into the code and figure out what's going on, and you can go to a community and you can check GitHub, and like it's open, whereas like APIs are just weird black boxes, and developers aren't used to that. Like it's a really weird, and I understand why they're black boxes, but it's a really weird like subsection of development where like, most developers use like a Unix shell, which is open source. Like every part of the stack is open source, and it's bizarre that APIs. It's not bizarre that APIs aren't. It's it makes a lot of sense, but it's kind of like unique that they aren't, and it makes documentation so much important, because if it's not documented, like how are you supposed to know? It's I think a lot of times people think of documentation, they think of like, let's look at like IKEA furniture, for example, where you get that like that paper packet and you can like figure it out. But if you got IKEA furniture and you got home, you open it up and you realize that they forgot to put that booklet in your stuff, like I think most of us could still figure out how to do it. And some of us would do that even if they did include the documentation. Like you'd be like, I could figure this out. But it's because like, what it's going to look like. It's going to be a chair. Everyone is buying a chair. Like you're not trying to like mod it or do something weird with it. And everything fits in really nicely. Like you can like see, oh, this screw is way too big. Clearly this is wrong. And like, if you're like pushing too hard, you kind of get that feeling like, this isn't right. Or like, if you're like, well, there's, only 2 screws, but there's 6 holes, that can't be right. And you can kind of like figure it out. But with APIs, that's not true. There's no interface. It's just like a very hidden interface. And like, it would, I don't want to stretch this metaphor too much, but it's almost like trying to do IKEA furniture, like with the lights out, where there's like nothing. And even then you can still touch and there's like some tactical feedback. So I don't know if I'm stretching this metaphor too far, but so I don't think documentation is similar to like what we traditionally think of documentation for APIs, because it genuinely is kind of the interface for the API. I know it's not completely true. I know that you actually make the API call and stuff like that, but you can't see it. There's no like if you were to read like a book like the design of everyday things, like they always talk about like affordances and stuff like that, but like those can exist, but they don't exist just by nature. Like you have to create all these affordances or all these like signifiers. And there's a ton of like very nuanced, like, different things, but like, they'll talk about like an affordance is like, you can pull open a door and you can see just from the way the door handle works whether you pull or push, and like, but you don't get that by default, which is where things like linters come in, or TypeScript, signature. Like we've been inventing ways to kind of like have these signifiers, but yeah, I think that's why documentation is so incredibly important, is because an API doesn't exist unless it's kind of documented. I'm not trying to get too metaphorical there, but yeah.
Did you know Mike's middle name is Affordance? Affordance Amundsen. He is Mr. Affordance.
That must have been tough to pronounce as a kid.
That's right. But as Greg points out, I have to change my name from Affordance to Signifier. There's a whole school of thought that is like adjusting that. But I love. It's
a little too nuanced for me, but it does make sense, and I get why. The second edition.
I just spent a couple of months in a community where signifiers are super important. So okay. I'm kind of sensitive. I'm a little hypersensitive to that moment. But I really love what you're talking about, because even when you get into the notion of like the design of everyday things, Donald Norman's book, and all these other things, because one of the things Norman points out, which you just echoed, was that, it turns out none of this stuff is easy to figure out. You don't just like plop down and understand your environment and everything, how everything works. Mm-hmm. You have to constantly experiment and push and tweak, and you find out that that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong. And we've all had those kinds of experiences. I tend to think of documentation as a kind of a translator guide, or like mm-hmm. a proxy. Mm-hmm. It says, look, you want to be able to do this kind of thing? Let me tell you how you can translate your thought into this cool magical API, mm-hmm. right? You really have to bring people in, and you have to meet them where they are, rather than just simply give them all the IKEA parts in a box and say, go nuts.
Yep.
So I really, and that's one of the things that going back to what I talked about before, what I like about the README approach is that, yeah, there's metrics and there's logs and there's readers who are only interested in reference, and there's readers who are interested in, what's the thinking behind it. There's lots of points of view. So I really am all in on this idea that that asset space, that mm-hmm. documentation space, encompasses a lot of things for a lot of people. And I love that you have this notion that there's more than one avenue in, there's more than one way to talk to people about it, but it's all about making that API, that product, accessible. And making it accessible to me may not be making it accessible to Aiden or Kin or whatever. So there's lots of ways. So I love that idea. What I'm curious about is, with all of the documentation tools, all of the mm-hmm. tools out there, all the generators, all the ones that make it easy to write, all the technical writer training and all this other kind of stuff, you still end up with what strikes me as a somewhat in the space, a somewhat peculiar point of view, mm-hmm. like a very different point of view. What brings you to that? Like, how do you get there? Like, what is it that made you say, all those college courses on technical writing, all this other stuff, that's not what I'm going to do. We're going to mm-hmm. do this instead. Where did that come from? I mean, what's the spark that caused you to think about it the way you do, which I happen to love?
I don't really know. My background is in engineering. I have a CS degree. I mean, I learned to program before that, and I don't, my point isn't that matters necessarily, but, my background is engineering, and but then I switched to design pretty quickly after college, and did design for a bunch of years, not doing dev tools necessarily. And then I kind of fell in love with this concept of like designing for developers. And the reason I did README, amongst other reasons, is it felt like it was, there's two really great things. One was it was incredibly exciting to me because I thought that there's the biggest delta between like what I could do, and because design doesn't necessarily mean it looks pretty. There's a lot of dev tools out there that look pretty, but like, the design, if they didn't look pretty, it would be basically the same. It wouldn't really matter. Whereas like, I think with documentation, like the usability does really play a huge part, and there's a ton that I could do, I felt. And the second thing is, it felt like a pretty good thing from a business perspective. Not that I think that way necessarily, but when you start a company, like it is nice to know there's already a line item for the thing you're building, and that people want it, and you're going to be able to pay people and all that. And you don't always have to. Not every dev tool has to be some sort of greedy capitalistic monolith, but it's always nice if companies, you're kind of on the same side and you're selling to the people with money. So I don't know. I talk a lot about this concept that I have of like intentional ignorance, which is I don't want to know too much, because once you start learning a ton about how things are already done, you're like, oh, I get why it's done that way, and fine, we'll keep doing it that way. I am, in a mostly playful way, a huge hater of OAS and Swagger, and I say that because like to me it's kind of one of those like just because you can add headers, query params, form data, cookies, these 19 different things doesn't mean that anyone on this planet wants you to. I think I'm not really answering your question, Mike, but I'll get back to it in a second. But like, my favorite API docs, not docs, but my favorite like API on the internet is Slack has like this like line in it that's like, this isn't an HTTP RESTful API, but if you're familiar with it, you'll be fine. And like, it genuinely says something like very similar to that. And it's kind of like, we're not going to follow the rules, because with them, everything's a post. There's some like, they make some, I always joke that like if someone turned it in for like their like thesis or whatever, they would fail with the Slack API, but it's one of the most used APIs out there. And like, I would argue, I don't know how you want to count it, but like one of the most valuable APIs out there, where like, Slack is a great product, but I think people use it because of all the plugins and extensions and what do they call them? Apps, I forget what they call them, but bots, etc. And like, I'm kind of bring up a bunch of random different things, because there wasn't like a something that I woke up and I was like, I get it. That was my like light bulb moment. But I just think we overcomplicate things, and then we look at documentation as, okay, I'm going to explain all my complicated things that I've done. Whereas like, I want to look from the opposite side, which is like, okay, how do we make this API easy to use? And then what can we do to, hide away? And, back to the Swagger thing, I don't actually have anything too negative to say about Swagger. I just think that the worst thing you can do is like, throw up a Swagger file, or even if it's on README, and just kind of like list out all the endpoints and all the parameters and all the query params and all that. Because I think, maybe if it's an internal API, that's fine. But for an external API, that's, it's just showing too much of the guts and not enough of like, what do you actually want to do with it?
Yep.
So I don't know. That's like, I just think APIs are too complicated is the end of the day. Like, if you call a function, it's one line. If you call an API, there's so much like setup. There's so much like making sure that, things are encoded properly and all that. It just feels, and SDKs get rid of a little bit of that. And like, there's a bunch of different ways to kind of get around it. Or maybe you could say like, oh, we're gonna do an RPC API, but that has its own like complications. Or GraphQL has insane, lots of upside, but also like lots of downside as well. And I don't know. I think that because my background, I think I'll sound like this. I've never worked on an API, like a big API from the creator side. I've always been on the consumer side. And I think that is one of the big things that gets me a bit of a unique perspective. That's not true anymore. Like at README, we have a well-used API, but going into it, I never thought of it from that perspective. I always thought of it as like, there's too many, just like too much plumbing, too many wires being hung out. Like it doesn't make sense. And I don't know. I think we see that all the time. Like I always say, I always kind of joke that like, I think of APIs and like RESTful APIs the same way I think of like TCP/IP. Like it's fine. I have nothing against like, it being, it's a great protocol or whatever you want to call them, like specification. But like, you don't have to see all the wires and everything. Like we can hide that away. The internet is just abstracting on top of abstracting. Like, DNS is just a nice way to type in, I paid $170,000 so that people didn't have to type in like 127.3.2.9 : whatever, they could just type in readme.com. And it's, and I think that, and I'm not saying this is a good thing because I actually think it's bad, but like Chrome's trying every year or so, I worked at Mozilla on Firefox, so I'm very familiar with like, this like back and forth battle, but like Chrome's trying to get rid of like URLs, and they've been trying to get rid of URLs for like a decade. And I think that's taking it too far, but like, it's just, we're constantly making things easier and easier. But APIs to me feel very like kind of stuck in the day they were written. So that's my long roundabout about APIs.
I actually, what I got, one of the big things I got from that, I got a lot, but one of the big things I got from that is that and this makes sense to me now when I look at it, you really look at APIs from the consumer's point of view first, I think. I see you talking to API consumers. Whereas as an API producer, when you put me in charge of documentation, you may be in big trouble. Because I think I love post and patch and put and get it, like, right? I'm the producer, not the consumer. So I think that's a really powerful message as well, is to think about the consumer when you're writing these documentation systems. Because, and I also think the other one that you mentioned as well that I got was, you know, what you want to see at your level if you're just a starter versus what I want to see, you know, if I've never seen it before, you're an expert. That's a very different point of view. And documentation, all of that material should be dynamic, should be responsive, should be interactive in ways that I think we're not quite there yet. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think I see a lot of that in what I read at Readme. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that we all have very different opinions and come at it from different perspectives, and I think that's kind of what makes things work. I think if people listen just to me, we'd have a huge problem because APIs would like look really pretty and not have a lot of stuff going on, but like they wouldn't be particularly like governance is a big thing that you talk about a lot, and like I don't particularly spend much time thinking about that because you do and because other people do, and I think that's kind of what makes this whole like API ecosystem work is. I can be very much like API should be stupidly dead simple, and then other people can be like true, but they also have to like, you have to put a little more thought into it from the creator side and all that. So, so yeah, I think it kind of, and I also think with documentation though, the best, dev tools are very interesting where like most tools you have one interface, but with dev tools, it's really nice when like the first interaction is really dead simple, but then you can like drop in as you learn more and need more stuff.
Yeah.
I always complain about reference guides because I think they're the most important and the least important part of your documentation. There's nothing worse than like going to a developer's hub to like use an API and all they have is just the reference guides because it's kind of like handing someone a dictionary and being like, learn this language.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a reference guide. Now it has to be correct. That's why it's the most important. Like because APIs are black boxes, like the only interface you have to the API to understand it is the documentation, is the reference guides. But like you can't really understand, like they're very like structured in a like computer speaky type way, like put to blank. And that's really fine behind the scenes, but I don't know. I always feel like there's like, I always believe that most APIs have 4 or 5 like main use cases that most people probably want to start with. There's tons more you can do, but like with Stripe, you want to charge a credit card. And there's some other stuff you want to do, but like maybe you want to like do it recurring payments or versus like a one-time payment, like stuff like that. But like there's very simple stories that you want to tell, and like reference guides don't tell a story. They're alphabet, or they tell stories. It's not a particularly good one. It's very like all the endpoints and stuff like that. And I always, we have a feature called recipes, we call it, and I think the best documentation are ones that tell you why you want to use the API, how to do something pretty common. Get you started. We talk a lot about like MVC, the time to minimum viable call, which is the smallest, most obvious thing you can do of consequence that proves that the API key is set up correctly, proves that you have, whether it be an SDK or whatever else installed, proves that your credit card's hooked up or whatever it happens to be true. And then people can like dig in as they go on, but like you want this like progressive configuration is how I think about it, which is, it could be, you want it to be stupidly simple to get started, very use case based, and then people will dig in as they grow the API a little bit more. But yeah.
Yeah, when Ronnie Mitra and I were doing so we were like reading through a lot of this material from the API Academy days. Ronnie's based in London now, and one of the things that Ronnie came up, which I thought was really good, he said, "Look, when you're learning a language, the first thing you want is they want to tell they want people to say." Say this, my name is Mike. Just keep saying that. Say, my name is Mike. Just practice that. You got it. Okay. So there's these things in the very beginning where you just do exactly what you're told. Don't ask a lot of questions. I'm telling you, if you want to make a payment, you fill in these 5 things, you press the button, it's done. Then eventually they're like, well, okay, so my name is fill in the blank, or my house is. Now you can start using a template to start filling in pieces. Like you have a general use case, you customize it for your needs. So now you learn sort of a little bit of syntax, you learn a little bit of pattern. And then eventually they're like, you know what, let's work on vocabulary. Let's just learn lots of new words. You know how to construct them. And to me, that is kind of the way I like to see documentation presented as well. Here's the common use case. Just do this. Thank you very much. You're done. Okay, that's enough. I can order a beer. I can find the bathroom. I can get on a plane. I can get a taxi. I can get home. I'm done. Right? All the important stuff. But then if I want to actually interact with someone, I need templates.
Mhm.
I need a little bit more structure. So I love the idea that documentation can fill in each one of those. And I loved what you said originally, which is, you know what, this documentation knows, you know, Mike has been here for like 2 years. Just skip all of that other template stuff. Go right to vocabulary because he's got a particular problem, right?
Yeah,
I
you might want to
love
go
the
straight to the
idea.
reference guides because you want to like figure out like, it's a number, not a string or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's how you conjugate that verb. Okay, going on. Yes.
Yep. And that's where reference guides come in really handy, but like they shouldn't be the first, in my mind, they shouldn't be the first thing you see. And you can play with that. Like, you know, it's okay. Maybe if it's an internal API and it's just like 3 of you and, you know, you all can like, you can just like turn to the other person and be like, what's going on here? And like, then it's fine. But for external APIs, I think it needs a lot more like, a lot more love.
As a consumer, I usually just want the phrase book. I want the tourist phrase guide for this API. That's what I want. That's all I need.
So oh no, go ahead, Gregory.
No, I got it. That's perfect. Go for it.
Oh no, I was gonna ask Aiden, because his view and real quick, you mentioned it earlier, the poll of different views on the space, I think is essential for us all to go forward. Like, what is docs? What are, you know, and we're all, and you and I don't always agree. Like, one of my favorite things about you is especially back in the day, I don't get this much love from you anymore, but back in the day, I'd write a post and within like an hour or two, I'd get an email from Greg. Like, you know, code API design first is bullshit. And generating code. And then, so I'd get, you know, and I love that because like, that's what I want in the spaces. I want dissent. I want people, you know, and friendly and being confident and saying, no, that's actually, here's the other view. But Aiden comes at it and views everything that we've been talking about with docs, but through a lens of change. And so like, you know, how do those references, you know, those reference docs evolve? Like, how truthful is that reference doc as it stands there right now? Is it a truthful representation of where we stand today based upon how we got here and then hopefully where we're going? So what's your view, Aiden, as far as the wider portal, the wider templates, all of this? Like, is it possible to spoon feed people thing when it's not always a truthful representation because things are moving so fast?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this too, Greg, in the past about, you know, accurate API documentation being important. And I think that's definitely something that I think we can all agree on. Like, you want the stuff in there to be correct, because the worst thing is for a user to have a bad experience where it doesn't work the way it says it will. Yeah. And then they're not sure, is it my fault or is it your fault or somewhere in between? But I think the other thing that, like, I was just on a call with some users right before this, and you know, this point in time when the API stops working one way and starts working another, those are like really critical periods, and people want to get notifications. And a lot of times for internal APIs, it's okay for things to change, but you just need to know about it before it ruins your afternoon. So Ken and I joked before that, like, there's no breaking changes. There's just ruined afternoons for a lot of APIs. And I think at the end of the day, like, you're spot on that these are human problems. And I think what's really cool about you know, products that are trying to solve the consumer side of this is that we don't all, as developers, have time to think about our consumers. Like if every single API inside of a company or every single partner API had like a Facebook sized or Stripe sized DevRel team around that API, like, some of the stuff would work better. But because they don't, you know, we never have enough time to take care of sort of that experience for the consumer. So I think it's really cool to have generalized tools that let us sort of get there or get 90% of the way there without having to make all those investments that other people do. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's there's probably 100 things on top of what you're doing now that you could do too. And we've talked about some of that in the past, but like, it's an endless well of innovation that can happen to make this relationship easier for people.
How do you decide what doesn't go in there, Greg, when you're deciding what features and what you build? I mean, there's so many things you can do. How do you think about what doesn't, what shouldn't?
Yes, from a business perspective, this is not a usability perspective. From a business perspective, I don't really have any interest in the creation of the API or the creation of like a spec files, because I think there's a lot of tools that do both those things incredibly well. And when I say I don't have interest, it doesn't mean that I don't think it's important. It just means I think that like it's not someplace I want to compete, because there's people who are doing it really, really, really well, and in many, many different ways. So like, for example, you know, Optic's kind of, and I don't think this is true, but Optic's kind of a competitor with like, you know, Stoplights, you know, Designer, or like Swagger Hub. And like, you know, I don't think many people are choosing between the two because they're very different products, but I don't really want to compete in that space, because I think there's so many good options that, you know,
it's the beginning of your responsibility. It's like it's handed off at that point.
Now, that being said, I completely understand why you'd want to be involved in that as a company. I completely get like the business use case of like, I want to be there at the API creation. Like, it's going to be so much easier if like, you know, I'm controlling all of it and a part of it, or not controlling, but like a huge part of it. But I want to stick to, because I think there's so many interesting things just to the UI, UX, what people touch and feel. I want people to see my company, and I would not have said this 5 years ago, but almost as a kind of support debugging tool, because I do think one of the worst habits that developers have is this mindset that people will figure it out. It's really hard to get good developer support, and that's changing a lot over the past few years. But you know, most support, like, that's why Stack Overflow exists. Like, Stack Overflow doesn't exist for other companies, because the companies actually support you. You don't have to like go hope that someone will charitably like know the answer. Or, you know, companies do put stuff on Stack Overflow now, and they, you know, they do hire someone to man Stack Overflow if they're a big enough company. But I just feel like there's like this gigantic like mindset with developers, and I'm guilty of this, of like, you know, build it and they will come. And like it or not, there's a reason why marketing, sales, support are all like really big, gigantic industries even. And it's because people need help. They need convincing. They need a story to be told to them. That's all marketing is when done right. When done badly, it's, you know, spamming. But when done right, it's just telling a story in a cohesive way. And I don't think most documentation does that. And I've seen talks where people talk about it like as storytelling. And I definitely agree with that. I don't think it has to just be paragraphs of text. I think there's a lot of ways to tell a story. Yeah, and I think, you know, for me also, developer experience, and one of the biggest things that traditional documentation, and I know we're leaving in 6 minutes, I'm going to completely pivot this conversation, but I think the difference for developer experience between a good and a bad experience is what happens when something goes wrong. So Aiden, you mentioned this a few times, which is like, you know, you and Ken said that, you know, there's no such thing as breaking changes, there's rude lunches. Like that, to take that even a step further, it's like, a good developer experience, things always go bad. When you're programming, no one's ever written code that compiles the first time. So like 5 or 20 years ago, you'd write code and compile it, and 4 months later, you'd be like, oh, I messed up. Like now we have like real-time linting and stuff like that, where it's like, or syntax highlighting is so phenomenal. It's kind of like a bumper car to kind of like make sure that you're, you know, staying, that you see, because again, we don't have these affordances or these signifiers in real life where like, you know, you're driving, you like go off the road a little bit, like things start to like rattle a little bit more, and it feels bad. Like you don't have that when you're writing code. Like it just feels fine. Unless you have syntax highlighting, and then you kind of start to feel a little bad because things are like, you know, you're getting like notifications. And I think there's nothing worse than like making an API call and it's saying like failed, and maybe it's a 503 error, maybe it's a 404, and like, but then it says like not found, or it says whatever, but it very rotely explains what's wrong, and you're like, that helps me not even remotely. Like my favorite error messages, and we do this at Readme now, but we're from Angular, because they would say like, here's the issue, but then they would link to the docs, and they would like have a special URL where you could like see, you would click in, like your actual variable would be in there. So it wasn't like the variable's missing. It'd be like, you know, the variable blank is not found. Here's how to fix it, stuff like that. And it felt like it was like nudging you back on the path. It was telling you how to fix it. We did this project about a year ago, or I did, where I went through every one of our errors and was like, okay, they were all horrible. They were all very like true. They told you exactly what went wrong, but none of them said how to fix it. And I mostly knew how to fix it because I was involved in it and I could look at the code and stuff like that. But like a lot of them, I was like, the user's not going to know how to fix it. So we have a rule now where every error has to have the error, but also has to say how to fix it, because someone internally knows how to fix it. It could be like API key doesn't work, like go to this URL and like actually show them the URL. Don't make them like find it or guess or whatever. And we also include a poem that I wrote. So I wrote about like 100 different poems. They're like 4-line poems about like your API failing. Because I figured if people are getting an error, they're probably pretty miserable. So might as well throw whimsy in there. But that's not exactly helpful. But what I do think is helpful is we also link to the log, and then you can send the log to us. So this is a Readme product where like you can link to the log in the response. And then I can click and like see the parameters. I can rerun it, stuff like that. And then I can like copy and paste it and send the link to support, whatever. And it doesn't matter if you use Readme or not. I just think it's such a phenomenal oversight that people have with like the errors are really. I think I'll sum it up with this. Documentation is way too optimistic, and bad developer experiences are way too optimistic, where they just think everything's gonna be right. And I think Readme can be a tool that is there for that, but also is there when things go wrong and like help you with that next step. Because bad developer experiences are like stop, and good developer experience just feel like they're nudging you back on the path.
Cool.
I like the poem idea. I think that needs to become an RFC and get baked in.
Yeah.
They're of varying qualities. Some are pretty good, and some I clearly phoned in a little bit. But yeah.
I really like what you said about the getting you on the path, not stopping you, but just getting you back, within the guardrails. I love that idea. That's very cool. Thanks.
I think we need more of that in the space. Like, yes, something broke. It was us or you, depending, but here you go. Like, let's figure this out. I'm stuck on a 500 error with some company called Postman, their API. I've got to figure it out here. So no, I literally have it on the screen. I got to fix it after this, but that's another conversation. Thanks, Greg, for being here. I appreciate this. This has been enlightening to hear the story behind your journey. But maybe we'll get you back and we'll dive into, I think, some of those metaphors and some of those other areas as well.
Or we can just do poetry readings of
yes, that's what I want.
Or I have songs too that I've made. I just got I have a love song called 410 Gone, and it's a love song. It's a sad country love song about with like all the status codes in and stuff like that. So like, yeah, I try to do as much as I can to be like whimsical when it comes to bad things happening with APIs. But
I love this. I love where this is going. This is going to be a great episode.
Cool.
Well, you should make a browser extension that just replaces all the status codes with your poems and your songs. So we all get to experience the internet as your mind does.
That's right.
Mean, I'll end it with this. So I wrote like 100 poems, and I was so proud of myself, and we published it. And like, I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to wait for like someone to notice it. And the first support request we got back was, you had time to write poems and you still haven't fixed my error. And I'm like, come on. So
I'll have time to fix your error because I wrote the poem.
Right. Yeah. I was busy.
Yeah. So I'd love to say that it went over incredibly well, but the first message was like a little negative, and I was like, yeah, that's fair, but cool. Well, thank you so much for having me on. It was really good to catch up with all of you. Mike, to meet you for the first time, really, and Aiden, Ken, to catch up with both of you.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, and enjoy your weekend, and we'll see.
I will do my best.
We'll see.
Good luck with the shot.
Thank you. All right.
Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.
Oops, cut him off a little bit there. Ouch. Well, thank you. That was a jam-packed one about I think that dimension of our world, documentation. I think that we're also familiar with, and I do love his view. Like, he is. I've battled with him over the years. Like, him and I argue a lot about things, and I love it. Like, it's like him pushing back. I'm like, makes me question a lot of my views on Swagger and Open API and the things I've done. And similar, I would say, in some ways, to our relationship, Mike. I think you pushed me in some areas that I think some areas that I kind of just take for granted, and I hadn't really dove in too deeply. So I cherish our relationship like that.
Yep, I think that's sort of characterizes a lot of our relationships, right? Is because I feel the same way about both you two. Really, it's like, oh, shit, yeah. Those are great moments, man. Yeah,
it pushes us out of our bubble, and I mean, I'm serious. Like, when Readme came along in the space, it really it was a breath of fresh air compared to all the API management stuff that I've been seeing. And I don't say this, it brought docs down to a landing page level, a marketing level, and not in a negative way. Like I'm saying it in the way that I would say he was articulating that it's very much about the consumer view, and marketing landing pages are very much intended for, that audience. And I think that's super valuable. So,
Yep.
And it's so hard to do that as a producer, to also think about the consumer. It's just it's hard to put both those brains on at the same time. So tools like that can help all of us do it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yep. Definitely.
Alrighty. Well, I'm going to let you go first, Aiden, but you enjoy your weekend. We'll see you next week.
Have a good weekend as well.
Alrighty.
See ya.
Bye.
See you, bud.
Alrighty. Well, any big plans this weekend? Are you gonna just?
You know what? I got a new toy. I might as well just brag, and because it's just such a dad thing. I got a new lawnmower.
Nice.
So I'm going to work on my new lawnmower. I'm going to mow the lawn. I'm going to be very excited.
No, where it's just, you got to enjoy being old in the finer.
Yes, this is it. This is it for me. This is, I literally used the meme. I cracked my kids up. I got a picture of my old lawnmower. The wheels are falling off. There's a hole in the deck where grass shoots out when I'm mowing. And then I've got my brand new, electric battery powered mower. And I literally put the two pictures side by side. This is how it started. This is how it's going.
Yes.
So that's me.
And you're electric, so you're environmentally friendly now.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely
nice.
I can redirect wherever the power is coming from. Yeah,
nice.
Exactly.
Well, you enjoy mowing your lawn, sir. I think I'm just going to rest and read a book this weekend. So
that sounds like an excellent idea. And we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week, sir. Thank you.
All right. See you. Bye-bye.
All right. Another one for the books. Y'all have a good week too. We'll see you next time. Cheers.